The stuffing's gonna have a bunch of components, right? We've got carrots and celery. We've got our bread. We have fruit like apples and some fresh prunes. And then we've got some butter and some chicken stock. And we also have some herbs, some fresh thyme and some fresh sage. So we can preheat our oven to 350 degrees. We've got our butter that's sitting out. And you know, if one or two of the sticks are softer than the others, that's going to help us down the road. So don't worry about the butter being sitting out at room temperature. That's actually a good thing. So first and foremost, a few sticks of celery. And again, taking a look at these guys, they've got a little bit of kind of soil or dirt. We can just give these a rinse. In cold water. And then, we're gonna make our, we're gonna cook this in this large saute pan, this kind of flat-sided saute pan that I have here. Any large pan, you can use a large pot, but basically we just wanna take a whole stick of butter and we're gonna drop it right in there over a medium-high flame. Get this guy to the back so we don't need it. Put this over here where everybody can see it a little better. Over a medium-high flame, we're just gonna melt our butter. And in the meantime, we can just trim the leaves off of our celery, trim the tops, trim the bottoms, and everything in our stuffing is actually going to be visible. So we want to make, it doesn't have to be perfect, but some nicer kind of evenly shaped dice. So the way to do that is we'll take our celery, and maybe it's a little too long and a little unwieldy, so we can cut it in half first to make it easier on ourselves. And then we could take these bigger ends, cut them in half. We can take a look at some of these smaller ends and see, do these need to be cut in half, or maybe they kind of are about the same size, so we can keep the smaller ends small, and then going back through, we can cut these into some nice kind of like, you know, 1-inch large dice that are going to be soft after it's cooked for, you know, a half an hour in the pan and an hour in with our baking, but it's still going to have some kind of texture and visual appeal. These can go right in the pan with our melting butter. And we don't really want to get any color. Just want to start this cooking process. So over that kind of medium-high flame, we're going to stir it fairly frequently with our wooden spoon. And we're going to keep on adding our veggies. This happens to be a great tool, a spoon, hold, anything to just make sure that you have somewhere where you can rest, spoon rest, your cooking spoon throughout the process. We have our onion. So just take our large onion here, slice off the kind of top end, slice off the bolster end. You can cut it straight in half. Peel it, getting rid of any of our tough peel. The stuffing is my favorite part of Thanksgiving. I don't know if you can tell the intensity with which I'm cooking this, but this is stuffing. This is go time, people. Everybody's going to judge us on our stuffing, so it's got to be delicious. And the best way to make it delicious is put lots of butter in there, so don't be afraid. We cut this guy as well in half, and then just kind of at an angle, we're just going to cut some large dice, the same kind of size. Again, a lot of this is going to get cooked for a long time. I just want some bigger pieces that are going to remain kind of intact and look really beautiful and not just disintegrate. So that can go right in the pan with our celery. And then we have our carrots. So these carrots, I'm going to peel them because we're going to actually be eating these whole, not straining them out, not just the flavor that we want, and the outside can be a little bit tougher and more bitter. Trim off the top, trim off the bottom, holding our kind of carrot touching the cutting board on one end and in our hands in the other. Just slice, turn, slice, turn, slice, turn, peel, turn, peel, turn. If all of you have never peeled a carrot before, you'll be very happy to know that within two carrots you can master this, because peeling carrots ain't no thing. And if you don't happen to have a peeler, a lot of people just scrape the carrot with the side of a knife, and that works really well. It's a little less elegant, and so I happen to use a peeler, but scraping a carrot works really well. So that, and get rid of our kind of scraps here. And then our carrot, one of them is really small, one of them is a little bigger. Our bigger carrot, we can just cut it right in half, being careful not to cut ourselves. I cut through the front first, and then I just kind of lower the back of the knife straight down. And then these guys, we can cut them into, again, maybe just 1/2-inch pieces, because the carrots are a little bit thicker. They're going to take a little longer to cook. And these can go right in our pan with our onions and our celery. Give them a mix. We can season this with some of the salt. We can add a couple of sprigs of thyme here. And what's going to happen is that we're going to cook this with the thyme, but the thyme stems are going to come out before we actually bake it together, because they're not going to be very delicious to eat. So these guys can go right in, and that's going to flavor everything. For our fruit, we can take a couple of apples, and we're just going to peel these. So to peel this apple, I just usually start at the bottom, and I peel in a circle at the base of the apple, holding my peeler flat and spinning the apple. I peel the bottom, and then I peel in the same method the top. At which point what we can do is just kind of in strips peel straight down and go all the way around. Whew. Amazing. Stuffing is my favorite part of Thanksgiving meal, because it's kind of like, I don't know, roast turkey is usually really delicious, but honestly, does anybody like roast turkey? It's a little dry. The gravy's great, but it's pretty, normal. Stuffing is just the one item that you really only get no other time of the year. Like Thanksgiving stuffing for me is really like the thing that makes Thanksgiving. The whole meal together is Thanksgiving, but stuffing is like the special, labor-intensive, long, multi-step dish that's ubiquitous. Some people have mashed potatoes, some people have sweet potatoes, some people have green beans, some people have Brussels sprouts. Everybody's got stuffing. And honestly, if stuffing isn't your favorite part of Thanksgiving meal, probably means you're not making your stuffing right, because it should be so delicious, because it's basically sweet fruit and vegetables that have been soaked with bread and butter and then baked together. It's a savory bread pudding. It's delicious. So we want to dice these guys. We're just going to take the apple and we're going to cut straight down right next to the core into quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're left with an apple core. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I got a couple seeds in here. We can just kind of, using the tip of our knife, poke those guys out, but ultimately no one's going to be upset. Laying these guys flat side down, we're going to now dice up these apples. So we've got this guy. He's one of the quarters that maybe we can just cut each of these in half. These guys are the right size already. This guy is going to cut into thirds. And then we can turn these and cut them again into the same size, kind of 1-inch dice that we were using. 1, 2, 3, for the celery, the carrots, and the onions. So we can set those to the side. The dried prunes are going to be really beautiful and delicious. Prunes are one of my absolute favorite. A prune is a dried plum. Really high in fiber, extremely sweet and delicious. Generally speaking, prunes got a bad name because people use prunes to help in dietary regularity. So people think of them as more of a medicinal use fruit, but they're really, really delicious. They have a ton of natural sweetness and a lot of great flavor. So you shouldn't be afraid to use prunes. I'm just gonna take these guys and I'm gonna give them a really mild, rough, just kind of chop through so that there aren't any giant pieces, but these are gonna stew together and soften and rehydrate and be really great. So just want some kind of medium-sized chunks. And those can go in with our apples. The next ingredients we're going to need are going to be our herbs and our bread. So taking that small bowl, we can put our fruit, our apples and our prunes right in there, because those are going to go in the pan next. So those are going to go in the pan in this bowl here, and set them to the side. Wash our knife off because we got some dried prune on there that's quite sticky. And we're gonna get our sage. So the deal with sage is that sage is one of the kind of quintessential stuffing flavorings that is going to, can't really smell it when it's fresh. But when it cooks together, it is going to be the ingredient that makes this taste like stuffing. So sage has these big wide leaves. It's really not very delicious raw. It's kind of got a really kind of sharp, spicy, eucalyptus-y flavor. But we're just gonna pick the kind of wide, flat leaves off, discarding the stem. And then we're gonna take our leaves and we're just going to kind of line them up like this and just slice them into some smaller pieces that are going to be visible. So you'll be able to tell there's some pieces of herbs in there, but you know, I'm not going so tiny with them. So just a slice, and I can go right in with our fruit. So we're going to add that to the pan. We can drop a bay leaf right in now with our carrots and onions to cook together. Carrots, onions, and celery. And what we're going to do now is we're going to heat up the butter and the chicken stock together to make the stuffing. So this medium pot, we can put our other stick of cold butter right in here. And we can put this guy on really just a medium-high flame. We're going to open our chicken stock and we're just going to dump it in right with this butter. For our bread-based stuffing, we're going to take the crust off of our bread. So to do this, I don't actually prefer to use a bread knife. I prefer to use just a flat knife. We're going to cut the ends off first. And then, just like I would take the skin off a fish, we're going to take our knife and holding it perfectly flat underneath the bread, we're just going to slice straight through. And you can see that it's flat to the board. I'm kind of pushing down but straight across. And what we should get is just that bottom piece of bread right off. At which point we can take this whole guy, cut him in half once, and then sitting it, we can trim around to get rid of the rest of just the crust. If I've got a tiny bit of crust in there, it's not going to hurt my feelings, but it's a little bit tough for our stuffing. So, you know, this would be great for breadcrumbs. If you want to take these crust and kind of leave it out and dry it and then throw it in a food processor or mortar and pestle, you can make great breadcrumbs. You should never need to fry breadcrumbs because throughout the process of cooking, I'd always be saving stuff like bread crust. In this case, it's going to go into the old compost heap. So, grab this guy, throw him in our little food waste receptacle here. Maybe we can wipe off some of this stuff that's going on our crumbs and make sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. We can give our carrots and our celery and our onions to stir. And actually, right here, this is perfect now. Just starting to get a tiny bit of color on the bottom. We can add our fruit and our sage right into this pot. So right in here, all that fruit. And we just want the fruit to have a chance to mix in with our vegetables and soften a little bit. But we don't want it to get so soft that it's all mushy. So we're just going to kind of put it over a low flame now and let the fruit cook over a kind of medium-low flame. Just let the fruit soften and stir in. So we get our big bowl. And we can either tear our bread into some nice pieces, bite-sized pieces, or if you want to be a little bit more efficient and fast about it, you can just kind of take this bread, cut it into maybe some slices, yay thick, cut it into some dices. They sell stuffing croutons. I often use stuffing croutons. They're really, really great. I think using fresh bread is awesome. Using dried stale bread is great. So if you happen to have some dried stale bread around, this works really well for that as well. Just as long as it's, again, that kind of rustic, toothsome bread is what we're looking for. So just going to tear these guys into those kind of bite-sized chunks. And the benefit to stale bread is that because it's drier, stale bread is just bread that the moisture is evaporated out. It's drier. It'll absorb more kind of fat and flavor. But the reality is, I've done it both ways, and I've found really similar outcome. So I think it's not, I don't think it's really a big deal. I think it's whatever you got. So, got this guy in. So we've got our bread in our bowl. And wipe up or clean up. We've got these veggies are just kind of finishing right here, just kind of over that medium low flame, just kind of coming together. We're going to wait until our butter's melted into our chicken stock. We're going to get this nice pan that we're going to present our stuffing in, and we're just going to butter it. So to butter it, we've got this kind of butter that's been sitting here. You could take maybe a quarter of a stick or so, and just using the paper to hold it in my hand so I don't get it all over my fingers, and just kind of rub it around. And you might notice that I've got some chunks of butter on here, and that is completely fine with me because ultimately it's just going to melt in. And I don't know if you know what the best thing in the world is, but it's buttered bread, and we're about to fill this with bread with prunes and apples and carrots and onions and celery and herbs and salt and chicken stock, so it's going to really bake together and be great. So all those chunks of butter, I promise, will be absorbed. Nothing's going to go to bad use. So the more butter, kind of the better. So we're going to stuff that. Give this a rinse. Give the old meat mittens a rinse, people. We can take our bread here and we can dump all these veggies, but remember, we want to fish out those thyme stems. So got a couple of thyme stems in here. You know, if you counted from the beginning, you can keep track of them. We've got a bay leaf in here. The bay leaf isn't going to eat very well. We were just really doing that for flavor. Maybe we'll put the bay leaf and a couple of those thyme stems on the top. It'll look beautiful when it's baked, but we don't want them in there. One of the biggest mistakes that I notice people making, and I make myself, is to try and mix stuff in a bowl that's not big enough, and then there's not room to actually mix it thoroughly. So I'm actually going to dump this bread into this big pot, which will work a little bit better because we'll be able to physically mix it in there. And you should feel comfortable. If you don't have a big enough bowl, you can use 2 bowls, or you can use your biggest pot or your biggest bowl in your pot, but you don't want to try and mix stuff if you don't have the room to mix it. So got this pot. We can take our carrots and our apples and all this goodies and dump that right in on top, making sure that we scrape all that kind of goodness out. If you want to take maybe a few cubes of bread in there and just kind of smush them around to make sure that any of that butter and flavor is really getting incorporated. We don't want to waste that. It's going to go right to our sink. We're going to season this with salt and freshly ground black pepper. Now we're gonna pour over this our chicken stock and butter. I'm not gonna pour it all in, however. I'm gonna pour about 3/4 in, reserving a little bit just so that we can take a look. If it's too soupy, we can't ever take the liquid out. So we just wanna mix it now, and we're gonna take a look, and then we're gonna taste it. We want to mix it and kind of scrunch it together so that the bread is absorbing all that liquid, but you don't want to mix it so much that you're like literally breaking it apart into all its pieces. We want to have really nice integral pieces of everything. And we can take it, so you can see that it's kind of absorbing everything. I'm going to give it a little taste. Wow. It is already tasting like that Thanksgiving stuffing that I want so much. Looks like it can take, actually, you can see a little bit of the liquid is still seeping out, but you'd be surprised how much liquid is going to bake out in the oven and it's going to set. So it looks like it can actually take the rest of this right in there, about that much more. And now we have all our veggies. We have our bread. We're ready to dump this into our buttered tray. So got this pan. We're just literally going to dump it right in here. And we want to let it fall and spread it evenly, but we don't want to pack it in. We don't want it to be overly dense. Remember that, you know, you got a lot of like kind of big soggy bread, and so we just want to kind of spread it out. And this is going to bake together and get really nice crispy bits on top, etc. But there's no reason to really pack it in. So just like that. I'm like 90% pumped for this stuffing. When it comes back out of the oven, I'm going to be 100%. We can take our thyme and our bay leaf, maybe put them on top. That'll look really beautiful. And this is going to bake in the oven for about an hour. And we can note the time. The stuffing's now been in it for an hour. So we can take a look here. And again, being really careful with our dry towels or our kitchen mitts. I'm just going to pull out our stuffing at this point and take a look at that. And this is exactly what we want it to look like. You can see it's nice and brown and beautiful. And this guy is actually going to be delicious, just warm or room temperature, so we can put it back in the oven right before we serve it if we want. But for me, Thanksgiving is all about the visuals when people are coming into my house. So I can actually just take this stuffing and I'll get a trivet here and we can place it right here where it can live until our guests come. I mean, this is just beautiful. It's done. Maybe we can again pop it in the oven, but I would like as many beautiful looking, mouth-watering, delectable things that, you know, I have to kind of like slap people's hands as they try and eat as possible out for Thanksgiving. Be sure to like and subscribe, check us on Instagram, and download the Project Foodie app on the iOS App Store. I hope you've enjoyed this Project Foodie cook-along, and I hope you'll join us for more. If you want to make amazing stuffing, you're going to need the following ingredients: fresh thyme, carrots, unsalted butter. I always use unsalted butter in recipes because I add salt separately. Fresh bay leaves. Dried bay leaves work perfectly well. If you can't find fresh bay leaves, feel free to substitute them. Chicken stock, and I prefer to find a natural, low-sodium version, a yellow onion, sage, freshly ground black pepper. I'm going to use a hearty, rustic, fresh baked bread. You can definitely use stuffing croutons, which work really, really well, especially if you can't find that toothsome bread. And I wouldn't endorse necessarily any one over the other, but I know my dad was a big Pepperidge Farm croutons guy, and his stuffing always tasted great. So choose whichever crouton you prefer, but any of them should work really well. Apples and prunes, kosher salt, and celery. If you want to make amazing stuffing, you're going to need the following tools. We have a roasting pan. We're actually going to bake the stuffing in there, and you can use, any tray, ideally something nice looking enough that you would want to present it at your Thanksgiving table, because we're going to bake the stuffing in there, and we're going to serve it right on there. So maybe a glass baking tray, or this nice metal roaster. We have a large pot, a large pan, a knife and cutting board. We have a wooden spoon. We have some assorted bowls, a peeler for peeling, a small receptacle for trash or garbage along the way, so I'm not having to constantly go back and forth from the garbage.